Actual psychologist, research nerd, and marketing pro with 25 years experience of applying psychology to the business world and busting myths, empowering organizations to think like their customers, to sell like a boss. I always say a mediocre strategist gives answers. A good or great strategist knows how to ask questions.
Yeah.
Literally anything we buy, anytime we are spending money on something, it is in the hopes for a better future. Disruption can be a great way of attracting attention for an instant. But if our brains say, oh, that's okay, God, that's not interesting. Next, you're not keeping that attention. And so disruption can open the door. But if you want to keep that door open, you really have to find ways to be relevant and compelling.
Wow.
Yeah, because I kill it at kids' parties.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Jasravee. Subscribe to my channel for conversations at the edge with thought leaders from the branding, marketing, and the business world. Conversations that ignite new ideas with rough, sharp edges. Hi, Chris. So nice to have you on my show.
Hello, Jasravee. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Yes, finally we are here. So, Chris, if I requested you to tweet your profile, what would you say?
So I actually stressed out about this a little bit. I know it's so funny, but like, how do I cram it all into a few characters?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say actual psychologist, research nerd, and marketing pro with 25 years experience of applying psychology to the business world and busting myths, empowering organizations to think like their customers, to sell like a boss.
Ah, how interesting. How interesting.
Yeah, it's been a fun career.
Absolutely. I think everything to do with consumer. And then, like you said, consumer psychology is your area, which is so complex and so deep and so, evolving. You never know if you really know. And if you really know, that also changes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I start with a lot of times when I'm presenting or giving a speech about consumer psychology, I'll start with an experience that I had. I always think it was my first day of graduate school. It may have been, in the first month or something, but in my memory, it's sort of set as like it was the first day, and it was very dramatic. So we're there in class and we're waiting for the professor, all these new psychology students, right? And this old guy walks in with a briefcase and he sets his briefcase on the desk and he looks at all of us and he slams his fist on the table and he says, "You will never understand people." And they just stopped. And we're all looking at each other, the students, like, why are we here? We're here to understand people. And then he followed up with, he said, the better you can accept that, the more effective you will be as a therapist and a clinician. And it's something you should always keep in mind. And it took me actually some time to really process that. And over the years, I've continually taken more and more from that statement. But where I've landed with it is that when you enter into the human sciences, you have to accept that you've entered into a commitment of continual learning, constant improvement, and always asking yourself, what more is there for me to learn? Because I think the moment that you think you've figured people out, that's when you start having blind spots. That's when you start having biases that really will undermine the work that you do. And so I'm so grateful for that moment, even though at the time I was like, what is going on?
It's so heartening to hear that, because when you're working in teams, you have the business head, you have the creative person, you have the marketer, and everybody thinks that, you as a strategic planner, just give answers, right? Just give answers. Yeah. When you want to keep asking questions and you say that, let's check this out, because you don't want to be in an ivory tower and have all the answers. You don't want to. because
No.
how we are evolving. You're the only person pushing for that. So it's heartening to
Yeah,
know that.
it's so funny.
Yeah, yeah. So
I always say,
yeah.
I always say a mediocre strategist gives answers. A
Mhm.
good or great strategist knows how to ask questions,
Yeah, yeah,
that
absolutely.
elevate everyone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great. On that note, Chris, when you said you like busting consumer psychology myths, first of all, how were you drawn to this? Uh, why did you decide to focus on this? And if you'd like to share some consumer myths that you busted.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking me that first part, because I think it's really important for me to sort of establish my intention here, because some of this can get pretty provocative. And if I'm not clear about why I'm so passionate about this, I think it can get sideways very quickly. Um, I think that, like I said, that, when you are in the human sciences, it is important to always keep your mind open and always accept that there's more to learn. And I think when we start to hear the truths about human behavior or consumer psychology, that's always a bit of a red flag for me, because that seems to imply that there is a right answer all the time, or that there is a complete answer. And I think that answers are usually incomplete because we're always evolving, we're always growing, and we're always learning more. The more we look at consumer psychology, the more questions there are and the more there is to learn. And so I think when I hear some of these statements, that I consider myths, I think it's important for us to challenge those. And because bad psychology equals bad marketing. And, when you know better,
Mhm.
to quote Oprah Winfrey, when you know better, you do better. And so I want everyone to excel and exceed and be great at what they do. And so by challenging these myths, my hope is that we can all go into the future armed with better insights and continuous learning.
Yes, absolutely. So, would you like to share some of the myths that you have recently
Yeah.
busted?
Yes, I just spoke at a conference, and I was a little nervous about it. This is the first time I've really dived into these myths in a real public forum like this, and so I was a little nervous about it, but it went very well. I got great feedback. People were felt very inspired by it, and so there are really four myths that I took a look at. There's plenty more. I'm actually working on a book about this very topic because I feel so passionate about it. But one of the first myths that I looked at was this idea that consumer psychology is changing rapidly. And, I've been doing this for 25 years. I don't think there's a month that has gone by in those 25 years where I haven't read some blaring headline about, consumers are changing, everything's different, and talking about how everything's so different and changing. And some of that's very true. I mean, in the last 2 years, we've certainly seen a lot of changes in how people behave. Um, but I think it's important to separate out the psychology on this hand from the behavior on this hand,
Mm.
because certainly behavior changes rapidly. The way we shop, the way we go about making decisions, those can change very rapidly. But the underlying psychology, the whys behind that, the motivations that drive that behavior are much more stable over time. And so I'd like to think about it in terms of motivations and means. So, means are the behaviors that we go about to achieve our motivational aspirations. The motivations are the why. So, they're the reasons why we act in the ways that we do. So, usually they're based in some emotional needs. So, things like identity, security, connection to others, um, providing for my family, those types of things. I can go back to ancient times. You go back to ancient Rome and look at why did people go to the market? Well, they went to the market to make sure their family had the things that they needed to get through each day. Food supplies and other types of things that really were about security, and certainty for my family, making sure we all have what we need. Well, we go online today, go onto Amazon, or go to the grocery store. Um, those motivations are very similar. But the behavior obviously has changed dramatically. And so I think this is really important because when you understand the motivation, you go deep into those very stable motivations, that gives us insight into what people are trying to achieve. And as behavior starts changing rapidly, we have an anchor uh, for what is it that they're trying to accomplish with this new behavior. And it gives us a little bit of stability on our part to understand and respond quickly, as well as anticipate how people might behave in any given situation. And I think that's something that's very important. And I'll give you a personal example. I'm kind of a big music buff. And when I was in high school, I used to go to record stores all the time. And I would spend hours there just digging through records and CDs and learning about new bands and, seeing what I liked and all that. And when I think about what those motivations were, really it was about identity. So, the music you listen to says something about who you are, but also discovery, exploration, those types of things was very enjoyable for me. And so the behavior was go to the record store and dig through all these records. Well, I don't get to the record store nearly as much as I would like these days. There aren't many left. But I do spend a lot of time on Spotify. And what do I do when I'm there? Well, I'm looking through music. I'm listening to playlists. What are those motivations? Identity. The music I listen to still says something about who I am. Discovery, exploration. So those motivations are still very similar. And so that kind of gives you a sense of how behavior changes very rapidly. But motivations are much more stable over time. And so, when we think about building strategy, when we think about how we're going to anticipate or respond to behavior changes, having an understanding of those deep motivations really makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of this, Chris, wherein whenever we are doing a category, to understand what is the role that category has been playing in a human being's life. Go back to the core code of the category. Like we were talking about malls, and when we looked at the evolution of a mall and how it started and what it represents in a town. Like a landmark place, having some culture, some escape, some exposure, and some tiny little transformation, every time you go. And of course, it's going to play a role, which is, going to change as the town itself evolves and how many more avenues it has. But essentially, that is what the grandiose of the mall is always trying to encapsulate, and the symbolism of each logo is actually carrying that. When you look at the names that they'll have, Central, Grand.
Yes. I love that. That's an excellent example. I mean, I think especially these days when we think about the mall and they're struggling quite a bit. But I think that at some point,
it's an unshopping mall. Yeah, it became an unshopping mall.
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily about shopping anymore. It's about the experience and different things. Yeah, absolutely. And incidentally, I know a plug for a TV show, but the new season of Stranger Things on Netflix is coming out, and I'm not sure if you've watched it or not, but the last season was very much. Oh yeah. So if you remember, the last season was very much about the Starcourt Mall and all of that, and I just thought for me it was so nostalgic to see a mall like that again.
Yeah,
very
cool. I have a 14-year-old, so every such.
So that's excellent.
That's I think you made a great distinction about the motivation and the behavior, and I think the entire behavioral science is based on this. I'd like to know your views about this. That as human beings, we've not really changed that much. How our brain processes things, and if we understood that, we'd realize that the little clever gimmicks that we are doing in marketing,
right? Yeah,
might not really even get registered and matter, because the brain is going to function in a certain way as a human being.
Yeah.
So, Chris,
I think,
yeah,
well, I was one more thing on that, and I think is important too, is that, one of the things, and this is kind of a sub myth, if you will, is that, insights always have to be fresh and new. And, there always has to be something new when it comes to insights. Well, I think part of that is because we're not making this distinction between motivation and means. If we're looking at behavioral data, certainly we want to have the latest data about what shoppers are doing. But when we look at the motivations and the underlying psychology, those insights are much more long lasting. They have much longer lives than the behavioral data, because it gets again back to this idea that motivations, the underlying psychology, is much more stable over time. So you can look at a study that is 5, 10, 20 years old, even in some cases, that is still relevant and valid today, and you can still develop tremendously effective strategies from. And so I think it's important in that sense too, that we're not throwing away the good with the bad, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And this is so much meaning, Chris, because sometimes, we just want something new, trendy, faddy
Yeah,
insight, like if it's
yeah,
not new, like just coin it as something new, like just package it as something new. Yeah, that's
yeah. And
yeah,
those
yeah.
are important
Mm.
too. And I don't want to undermine the importance of new data and
Yeah,
fresh data. But I think we also can appreciate those more long-standing insights that are still, you very much able to fuel, very interesting and effective strategy.
yeah. Let not just for the sake of having something new, like
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
like it's okay. I mean, we are not changing at a basic level that much, so
Yeah. Well, I'll
yeah.
give you an
Mm.
example too that I love in this case, which is um, an insight might be something like, um, when we think of identity, people love to think about themselves, talk about themselves. That sense of identity is really important to people, right? I mean, we could say that that's not a new insight by any means. That you could go back, centuries, and that was the case. But there's a certain company that had one of the most effective marketing campaigns in history based on that insight. And that was Coca Cola, when they started putting names on their cans and bottles. And that was all about, oh my gosh, I'm going to go look for my name. I'm going to look for my friends' names. And it created such excitement and engagement. And that became a worldwide phenomenon based on an insight that is perhaps centuries old.
But gave it such a modern relevance and twist.
E-
Absolutely,
exactly.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Chris,
Yes.
next myth.
Next one up. All right.
With
We
you on
busted
this
that one, huh?
ride. Yeah.
Okay. So here's one that I feel so passionate about. Sometimes I can get a little, get a little much about this. So, but I feel strongly about it. So I hear this all the time in various forms, and it's shoppers don't think. And the way this plays out is, oh, well, you know, shoppers act on autopilot. They're not really thinking. I hear, I've worked with, so many brands over the years. But I hear things like, well, my category is a drive-by category. People just, barely stop. They just grab whatever and they don't think, or they buy based on price or habit, and they're not really thinking. And, I what bugs me about this is it really is kind of a blame the consumer strategy or thinking, because even though someone may be shopping on autopilot, there's a tremendous amount of thinking going on beneath the surface. They might not be as aware of it, but there's a lot of decisions being made. There are influences that are happening. And I think when I hear that from a brand or a company, what I hear is, we don't want to do the hard work of trying to reach them, even though they're in autopilot mode. And I will admit, it is hard work. It's not easy, but it is absolutely doable. And I want to give you an example of a pretty common example of what this looks like. So imagine this scenario. You are in your car and you're driving a very familiar route. Maybe it's from work to home or from the store to home or something like that. And you pull into your driveway, and suddenly it occurs to you, I don't remember very much about that drive. Um, and it just seems like there's kind of a blank, like you're on autopilot, right? But at the same time, you stopped at all the stop signs, you turned and made all the right turns. If other drivers, were there, you responded to them, so you're being influenced. There's a lot of thinking and influence still happening. It's just that it didn't register in your memory. And so I think when we think about shopping and people shopping on autopilot in certain categories, um, that is very similar. There's still a lot of thinking. There's still a lot of influence that can happen, but it does take some hard work to do that. And so I think that it is important for us to distinguish: is this um, a situation where we can't influence, or is it just a situation where they don't have a lot of memory, or they've been trained to shop on price or shop by habit? And that is on us as marketers. If our shoppers are shopping on autopilot and they're just buying the lowest price, or they're just buying the same thing they bought the last time every time, that is on us. We have trained them to do that by overusing price promotion, by not providing anything interesting in the category for them to shop differently. And so we have to think about new ways to get attention and then influence shoppers as they go about their shopping trip. And so this, I think, is where empathy comes in. I think empathy is a superpower. I talk a lot about this, is it's not enough to think about your shopper. You have to think like your shopper if you really want to be effective, because empathy is such a superpower. In fact, Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, recently made a statement that I just thought was wonderful. He said, the source of all innovation comes from the most humane quality that we all have, which is empathy. And I just love that, and I really latch on to that quote. I thought it was fantastic, because when we think like our shopper, what we're doing really is we're setting aside our own perspectives, our own biases, what we think. We're able to set that aside and say, I'm going to put myself in their headspace. I'm going to understand their perspectives, their lives from their point of view. And that's where some real magic can happen.
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
right?
Yeah. So Chris, I think if I could add, and I'd like you to have your views about this, that
Yeah, great.
a lot of times shoppers, the thinking is subconscious. The thinking and the decisions have been made at a subconscious level, and consumers have bought it, and then there is a lot of post rationalization
Yes.
also happening. So if we keep into account both, because both are important, the
Yes.
consumer needs to feel that they did the right thing, considering the conscious evaluation parameters that they had, of course the social proof, etc.
Yeah.
And whatever the biases that they have, uh, that has become like a shortcut in their brain to go for a certain brand. So I think marketers don't think.
Sometimes, right? Yeah. So I like to say, put it a little bit differently, and maybe a little more like judiciously, and say, marketers like to be efficient.
Yeah.
It really, sometimes it is. I feel like I need to kind of shock people into thinking a little bit more, because I think it really is for the sake of being more effective. I think when we use phrases or things like shoppers don't think, there is a bit of laziness, if you will. It's a little harsh, but again, I feel like I need to shock people out of that thinking sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
And it also gets into emotional engagement. When you think about anything we buy, literally anything we buy, anytime we are spending money on something, it is in the hopes for a better future. Now, and I love having this conversation, and I actually have this with my friends sometimes because it just gets very interesting. My position is every time we buy something, it is in the hopes of a better future. And people say, well, like, what about like buying toilet paper, huh? I'm like, well, it's better than a future not having toilet paper, right? So it is, we always, if you think about it that way, then you can start to ask yourself, well, what do they want? Like, what is the aspiration here? And how can we help them get there faster, more effectively, more efficiently, and in a way that's more enjoyable, because that's what ultimately will influence your shopper, your consumer.
Yeah. Chris, to have empathy with the marketer, you made a good distinction about being efficient versus being effective. And to be fair, the daily pressures have increased so much for the marketer with,
Absolutely.
everyday sales data, with e-commerce and performance, matrices coming into the picture. But in that, like keeping the right anchors alive for understanding the consumer, really pays.
Absolutely. And I think that
Yeah.
you kind of get into this is another kind of myth as well, which is it's too expensive or too time consuming to create in-depth insights. And I think you said it right. It's about building those anchors. It's about building a foundation of insight, because when you go deep and you understand the motivations, the aspirations that your consumers have, that's a foundation that you can tap into again and again and again. And it actually will help speed up your process, because you don't have to start from scratch every time you want to understand your consumer. You've got that foundation to start with. And so it can actually help you be more efficient, more effective in a manner that is faster and more responsive.
Yeah, absolutely. And the
Yeah.
moment you were talking about the foundational anchors, Chris, I felt that one thing I notice is that whenever even research is happening, there's a lot of focus on category behavior. There's a lot of focus on, how the consumer is behaving, and the motivations therein. But
Mhm.
if we zoom back to them as people and their
Yeah.
life stage, and what they seek in life, like you were saying, a better future, I mean, that is a very human person life motivation. And if
Yeah.
we get those anchors right, those are always going to help interpret the changing behavioral data better.
It's
Yeah.
exactly right. It's all connected.
Yeah.
That changing behavior happens for a reason. All behavior happens for a reason. And when you understand those reasons, it just helps you respond more quickly, helps you understand and be more effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so
Yeah.
shall we move to the third myth?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is one that I've seen popping up a lot lately. And it was so, I think the reason why it's coming up so much is because it sounds really interesting. It's like clickbait. And so when I saw it, I'm like, I need to know more about this. Is this true? And it's that consumers' attention spans are less than those of goldfish. And I mean, it seems like in the last couple of years, I've just seen this keep popping up. So I'm like, I'm going to do a little digging and see about this. Well, the thing is, there's absolutely no evidence of this whatsoever. Zero. So there's e- the reference point that I keep hearing is that there was a Microsoft study. Microsoft did this study and they found that consumers' attention spans are less than those of goldfish. That study does not exist. They did not study. They did not make a comparison to goldfish. There was nothing. In fact, no one has ever studied the attention spans of goldfish. I don't even know how you would do that, but there's no study at all that has ever existed to do that. And in fact, for goldfish, they actually have been able to study their memories using food. And they found that goldfish have memories that can last months and months. And so, hopefully I'm vindicating these goldfish as well. But, I think what's behind this is attention. It's not that our attention spans are less or that we're incapable of attention. It's that there's more competing for our attention these days than ever before. And that what that means for us as marketers is that we have to work harder to be more relevant, more interesting, more compelling, more attractive. to get their attention and then keep it. And that is very possible. If you've ever binge watched a program on Netflix, maybe it's Stranger Things, that our attention spans can last very long. In fact, all day probably. If we're interested, if we're engaged, if it's something relevant and motivating for us, our attention spans are there. It's just that there's more competing for it. And so we as marketers just have to work a bit harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you so beautifully said, that for that you have to understand what is the substitute, what is the frame of reference, and what are you competing with. Like Netflix says, I'm competing with sleep. So when you said day, please include night as well.
Yeah, exactly, right.
If the season is not complete, the night also gets usurped.
Exactly. I've definitely had rough mornings because I was watching something that was really interesting the night before. Yeah. I think that it's important for us to understand kind of the nature of attention as well. And how do you get it? How do you go about attracting attention? And the thing is about attention is that it is a limited and finite resource. And as people, we only have so much attention at any moment to give away. And I like to it's a strange analogy, but if you think about attention like soldiers, like your troops, right? You can only deploy your troops in so many places before you're depleted. And you can choose to put all your troops over here, but then you're missing everything else. Or you can spread them out all over the place, but you're not getting as much from any one of those. But once you've depleted your troops, you don't have any more to give. And so we always have to think about attention as a finite resource. And so that's why our brains, being as efficient as they are, have created something called selective attention, where our brains automatically screen out information that we don't think is relevant. It's not something we're aware of. It happens automatically. And an activity that I like to do to showcase this is I just ask people to wiggle their toes. Just take a second to wiggle your toes. You can feel your toes. You can feel probably the inside of your shoe. Maybe your toes are cold. Maybe they're warm. But the thing is, 30 seconds ago, you weren't thinking about your toes. They were still there. All of those sensations were still there. It's just that they were not relevant in the moment. And so your brain automatically filters that out. But as soon as we bring attention to your toes, then that becomes relevant. And you're now aware of all of those things. And so that's exactly how marketing messages are, or any kind of marketing messages, packaging, commercials, anything like that, is unless it's relevant and compelling and interesting, our brains are going to screen it out. And once that happens, you've lost any opportunity to communicate and convince your shopper or your consumer to buy your product. And so we always have to be very aware of, are we being relevant? Because really, relevance is the golden ticket. Finding ways to be relevant is how you get attention and how you keep attention. We often think about disruption. Well, disruption can be a great way of attracting attention for an instant. But if our brains say, oh, that's okay, God, that's not interesting. Next, you're not keeping that attention. And so disruption can open the door. But if you want to keep that door open, you really have to find ways to be relevant and compelling to engage that consumer.
Yeah. Lots of points here.
Yeah.
So for our audience's sake, I love this. Our brain is an ignoring machine.
Yeah. Yes, I love that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're going for shortcuts all the way because the brain needs to conserve energy. Absolutely. Second point that you said was the need for a narrative. And that is what all the seasons or every episode, it leaves on a question. So you want to know what's next. What's next?
The cliffhanger. Yeah.
Brain is compelling you. It's that like a drug kind of an addiction that you want to know what happens next. A lot of times, Chris, what I do is, I know I'm going to get into this trap. I know this is a binge-worthy season. And I want to, escape it. Or I want to hack it or have an antidote. I just go on
Right.
Wikipedia and read what's going to happen next. And honestly, I don't get into the trap then because I already know what's going to happen.
That's
Now I
so
don't
funny. I'm
need
gonna have to
to
try that. Although I
waste
love the
another hour.
surprises too, so I don't know. Like I
No,
have to
no.
like
When I
be
have the
careful.
time, yes. When I have the time, yes. But when I know I don't have the time and I cannot afford it, that's when I do it. I trick my brain.
That's brilliant. I love it.
and that is what you were saying about if a marketer builds narratives like that
Yes,
in their
absolutely.
messaging, even if there isn't a big idea, but every little execution is, is building towards that larger gratification, then you also keep them interested, your
Yeah.
consumer.
And if you think about, a consumer journey, I think it's a great way to think about it too, is how do we make sure that my consumer wants to know what's next? That's great. You just inspired me on that one. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, nice.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I must tell you that the goldfish are very, very grateful.
They are vindicated, right?
Yes.
I love it.
I have a champion finally. We have a champion.
That's right, exactly.
How thoughtful was that?
Well, I am an animal lover, so
Okay, great for them. Yeah. Okay.
How about
So,
one more myth? We have time
yes,
for one
Chris.
more?
Oh,
'Cause this is a
absolutely.
big one.
Okay.
This is the big finale here, I think. So, and I think this is where we start to get into some things that can be kind of provocative and a little controversial. But I've got the goods here. So, this myth is that we can accurately identify consumers' emotional states simply by scanning their faces. And this is one that has come up quite a bit in the last 5 years or so because of artificial intelligence and these claims that um, artificial intelligence can accurately scan someone's face and tell you exactly how they feel. Well, that is absolutely inaccurate. Um, and I reference the work of my hero. Her name is Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she is a psychologist and neuroscientist, and she is among the top 1% of cited scientists in the world for her breakthrough work in emotion and emotional engagement and expression. And her work, actually, I should also plug her books for her because they're fantastic as well. She has two great books. One is called How Emotions Are Made, and the other is called 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And I would, for most of the audience, I probably recommend going with 7.5 Lessons About the Brain first. It's the more accessible of the two. The first is a very dense book. It was even for me as a research nerd, someone who's been doing this for a long time. It's not a tough read. I mean, it's fascinating, but it is very technical in some ways. But 7.5 Lessons is a great read. It's very entertaining. She has a great way of writing. But she looks at one of the things that she looks at is emotional expression. It's been part of the work that she's done for years. And her work has revealed that people express any given emotion in a wide variety of ways. When it comes to expression of emotions, that variability is the norm. And so, as an example, we can look at anger, right? So, in anger, people in urban cultures express anger with a scowl about 35% of the time. Now, as Dr. Feldman Barrett says, that's good enough to get your work published, but I'm not sure you'd want to actually hang a marketing strategy on something that happens 35% of the time. And so, when we look at a scowl, people scowl for all sorts of different reasons, right? They might be angry, but they also might be concentrating. They might have gas, right? There's a lot of different reasons why someone might scowl. And we also express anger with our faces in many, many different ways. Scowling is one of them, But people also might smile or laugh in anger. They might cry when they're angry. There's many different ways that people can express anger. And so, the evidence is really clear that any given emotion can be expressed in a huge variety of ways. And any given facial expression can have a huge variety of different emotional meanings, if any at all. And so I think it's really important for us to keep that in mind, because I think that can really lead to the marketing missteps if we are over relying on just an expression to tell us what someone's feeling. And the question I often get here is, well, Chris, when my spouse makes that face, I know exactly what that means. And my point here is, it's not because of the face, it's because you know your spouse and you've seen that face many, many times, and from history, from context, exactly what that means. It's not just the face.
Yeah, this is really huge. This is really huge. And like we say, the context is everything. Like, how will you know unless you know?
There's a zillion different reasons. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Actually, you just reminded me, there's a great book too that I'd recommend called Context is Everything by, pardon me, by an author named Susan Engel. And it's been really influential in the way I think about these things as well. When we think about, what are these AI systems measuring? Well, they're measuring physical cues, and they're able to identify physical cues. What they're not measuring is the underlying psychological meaning of those cues. And that's where so many other things come into play to help make, as you said, there's so much context, around it. What is the situation they're in? What is their body doing? Because that's part of the process, part of the context as well. What are they responding to? And so I think, this is something for all of us as marketers, to really challenge ourselves and challenge these claims, because, people spend a lot of money on AI systems to detect emotion. And I would not be doing my job if I didn't caution people in that situation.
It's time for talent show. And you got to do something for our audiences.
Okay.
What is it? And don't forget, Mr. Freud is watching.
Yeah, Mr. Freud is watching right here, my little bobblehead. Well, this secret talent that I have is, it is the result of probably a misspent youth. But it makes me very popular at 6-year-old birthday parties. So my secret talent is balloon animals. I can make a balloon. I'm a little rusty, but I can make a basic dog pretty easily. We go about our, hopefully I won't pop this and scare everyone. This, and the hardest part of this is not making funny faces while you do it, because I'm always like, but this, go, get in there. And almost there. There we have our dog.
Wow.
Yeah, like I kill it at kids' parties.
You are their favorite. Let's see how you do this. Yeah.
All right, let's see how we go.
Okay, Chris. Mother's best advice.
Mother's best advice. Be the job, big or small, do it well or not at all.
Oh my God, how nice. Okay. Yeah. What would you do on Mars for fun?
Oh, I would probably, I just think I'm fascinated by like the red dust. So I'd probably just like roll around and play with the dust. And I think it's just fascinating.
Nice visual. Okay. As per your best friend, as per your best friend, what is your most often used phrase?
Oh, geez, that's easy. Awesome. I use the word awesome way too much.
Okay. What would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Oh, geez. Everything's going to be okay. I think, I tend to overthink things, and that started at a very young age. And I think just everything's going to be all right.
What a book you'd like to gift to all your friends?
Oh, wonderful book that really changed my life is a book called The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. In fact, it has very much influenced this entire conversation because he talks about the importance of updating our mental maps, and that's the really to make sure that you're going where you want to go, living a life that you want to live. Is always update your map.
Super, super. What is your favorite childhood memory?
My grandfather was a untraditional grandfather. Very into bling. He owned a bar, and was just like the coolest guy. Like would have dark shades and gold chains, and he was just such a cool guy. Drove this big gold Cadillac, and he was just being with him was always so fun.
Wow, wow, what a memory! What's something new happening in life right now?
Just got a new puppy. In fact, we're going 2 weeks with our new puppy, and so it's been a journey. Let's just say. And as I mentioned just before I got on, he made a mess on the floor that I had to take care of.
Okay, if you had to devote the rest of your life to philanthropy, what cause would you choose?
So for me, it's very personal. It would be LGBT causes. In particular, I think because it's such a need right now, is protecting and empowering trans people.
Okay, okay. What is your greatest joy?
Music. It has been, for me, it has been an escape. It has been joy. It has been pleasure. Like whether it's live music or just searching music, it's something I'm so passionate about.
Okay. What is a lesson that took a long time to learn?
Oof. I'm going to go back to how we started and say this idea that you'll never fully understand people, because that was always what I wanted to do, and it took me a very long time to sort of fully grasp, what the benefits actually of realizing that's something that you can never really do.
Okay. What's next, Chris?
So next for me is I'm writing a book actually based on these myths, and just literally have very beginnings of this. But I'm really excited. I feel so passionate about this because I feel like it's something that really empowers people. And so, yeah, that's next for me.
Yay! First of all, you did so well.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm so nervous.
Secondly, for announcing this on Jagged with Jasravee. So once you've written the book, we'll invite you again, and then you can talk about
absolutely. You can invite me back anytime. I'd be happy to. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
It's a wrap up. Chris, if you could share any online addresses, emails, how can our audiences reach you?
So my website, it's in transition right now, so it's a little wonky, but it's thebuycologist.com. And you can always reach me either through the website or at chris.gray, and that's Gray, at thebuycologist.com. And, I'm always so happy to hear from people with questions, or, if you felt like I did something well, or you want to challenge me on something. I love it all. So by all means, feel free to reach out.
Super. We'd have it in the show notes also.
I absolutely, by all means, make sure you subscribe, like the podcast and video. I'm like so nervous. Yeah, and I think that boy, you really are on it. I'm very impressed by your insight and your own curiosity. You make the show work, and so really, everyone, just tune in.